In 1881, the Prussian Academy of Sciences in Berlin receives a letter from the German Council in the Republic of Turkey. This letter says that Karl Sester, a German railroad engineer, discovered a number of colossal statues on top of a mountaintop. So they commission Otto Pushtin to assist him, which is, with the Academy, and they take a 2-week journey together. No, sorry, 2-month journey to get here. They have to go up all kinds of rugged mountains, terrains, up the Euphrates River, and then finally up Mount Nemrut. This was 7,000 feet above sea level. You can look at it. It's obviously a pyramid temple. Otto Pushtin's notes said that these statues were carved right out of the rock. The heads were exposed, and they were well over 6 feet tall each. Right from the start, he noticed that these were Greek statues, not Assyrian. This was confirmed when he found a bunch of hieroglyphs naming the gods. Zeus, Ares, Apollo, Hercules, Mithras, which I told you Mithras was pre-12,000 years. And honestly, this thing looks like it's gone through 2 pole shifts, and it's likely, pre-24,000 years. Now let's look at Greece and Turkey on a map. Need I say more? Pole shift. And this puts into perspective why it's Turkey that the Derinkuyu and these 200 other underground cities were to survive the pole shift, because the original Greeks were the original Atlanteans. This is where they were. And even that Zoroaster story, where, it's kind of like Zoroastrian Noah's Ark, where they were saying to build these underground cities, and I'm saying that probably one Atlantean built each one. Like, look at Zoroaster, the Greek symbol in his hand of victory, the laurel crown. King Antiochus is the one that made all the inscriptions, built the temple, the statues of the deities to honor them. And he said he was also a god, son of Mithras and goddess Laodice, if I'm not butchering that. So you can see here when they're called kings, like King Arthur, and they're still Atlanteans. They're just like important, like the kings of that Atlantean group. Same with like priests and priestesses. They were all Atlanteans. So let's see the historical fiction. I mean, of course, there's a whole archaeological fiction attached to it as well. Same timeline as this. That King Antiochus was born in 98 BC, a real man, even though the inscription states he's a god. And, says his father and her mother, and he was actually half Iranian and half Greek. And this explains, why there was like Greek gods and Greek inscriptions in Turkey. Just all the a whole freaking page of just spun BS. Like, we literally have no historical facts. Like, the only facts we can, the only knowledge we can attain is what we can figure out ourselves. So when Otto Pushtin comes back with these notes and they find out they're not Assyrian, they're Greek, and they're like, oh, put it together. They pull him off the project, put somebody that's more trained for these matters, and send him back to excavate these ridiculous, obviously clay tablets that are supposed to look like they're water eroded. They're not even rock. They're just absolutely absurd, but it's supposed to give it more depiction between the Greek and Iranian depiction.
Among all the relics, one took center stage. A lion relief, excavated on the western terrace, was constructed in the realistic Greek tradition, but the head and mane clearly displayed Hittite influences. Moreover, on its back were 3 planets, 19 constellations, and a crescent moon. The inscription on the lion identified the 3 planets as Jupiter, Mercury, and Mars, all of them surprisingly being represented by the god statues in the sanctuary.
A horoscope depicting a particular date in time. It is the earliest known Greek calendrical horoscope, a unique feature in archaeological excavations. Putting all the information together, it gives us a date in the 1st century BC.
Being one of the oldest horoscopes in the world, the lion relief merited further study. In 1955, analysis of the alignment of the constellations revealed the date to be July 7th, 62 BC.
Archaeological excavations didn't even begin until 70 years later. Now, notice Otto Pushtin. He said that these statues were carved right out of the rock. Now, Look at these bodies stacked on these chairs. Like, they are very suspicious to me. That's not carved right out of the rock, first of all. Second, it's such a poor job. Like, that's not how these gods, they were like a perfect symmetry and portion. This just looks like a super shoddy job. And why are the heads not attached? If they could excavate all these body members and like the chair, why didn't they put the heads on top of the bodies? Sounds like some of the heads, at least I think some of them broke off, but at least most of the heads are actually still attached to those bodies, and it looks like nothing has actually been excavated. And here's another little forgery that was quote unquote excavated of King Antiochus shaking hands with Hercules. It's just such a shoddy job, so cheap, and like just obviously not of the scene. Like, it's just insulting to our intelligence. They said that this mountain was in dire need of a drainage system, which is interesting because mountains have drainage systems. Drainage systems are the result of the pole shift. Mountains are a result of the pole shift. Land pulling apart, bodies of water being ejected. So if this is a natural mountain, why does it need a drainage system? Why doesn't it have the evidence of real mountains? Because it's not a real mountain. And neither are the pyramids in Antarctica, which are not too large to be pyramids, and neither is the pyramid of Cholula, which was thought to be a mountain or a huge hill for centuries. It wasn't even excavated till 1931. Excavations went on till 1970, like 40 years later, and it's barely even excavated. That's how big it is, and it's 7,500 feet above sea level. Same as Nemrut. The fact that they excavated Cholula and they're refusing to excavate Mount Teotihuacan or even acknowledge that it's a pyramid, even though it was like found on ancient maps as a pyramid, means there's something very significant underneath that they don't want to expose. And there's the Bosnian pyramids, then the ones on Faroe Island, then more in Java, Indonesia, another in Pakistan. Let me know if you in the comments if you have any more. The kingdom of Pergamon has been excavated for the last 130 years. Excavation started in 1887 by German railroad engineer Karl Humann. That sounds familiar because Karl Humann, for my Mount Nemrut video, he was the one that came back for damage control and excavated all those forgeries that sold a different story than reality. And if you're thinking, wasn't the other guy the German railroad engineer, Karl Sester? Yeah, that was the story given there, that German railroad engineer just like stumbled upon these statues of Mount Nemrut, and then, you know, they called in these professionals. So it seems German railroad engineer seems to like be their cover to like seem non-conspicuous somehow. Kind of funny, they were both named Karl too. And not that, you know, obviously he was an archaeologist, but archaeologist, government archaeologist, working for the Royal British Museum, which is government. And that's how he got permission to excavate. He wasn't just a random archaeologist that made this discovery, obviously. You know, he was backed by all the elites of Germany, and that's why the Sultan gave them permission to do this excavation. They unearthed the altar of Zeus, which is a depiction between the giants and the gods, or the titans and the gods, which are all the same stature because they were all in the same bodies. I was going to do a two-part on this episode and get into that, but I decided to just do a one-part on this and then get into that and some other, the wars of the gods. They excavated, and then they just pretty much stole it. They just took it to Berlin and made a museum called Pergamon Museum. I mean, that's what really gives away that it was ancient Greece. The rest is like, you know, columns, Greek columns and stuff like that, but not nearly as noticeable. The altar of Zeus reconstructed is like 36 by 33 meters. Pergamon Castle Hill, or the Acropolis of Pergamon, is 330 meters high. And Pergamon is mentioned in the Bible, the city where the worship of Zeus, Dionysus, and other pagan gods were worshipped. So more proof, these Bible stories predate 12,000 years. And upon further digging, the altar of Zeus is not in its original form, it's a replica. They like reconstructed it. That's why you don't see all this erosion and it's not shattered in a million pieces. They like put them together and redid it. They also took other things that would give away that Turkey was really Greece, like this life-size Athena statue, 12 feet tall. And a lot of these Greek artifacts have been taken from Turkey. The Turkish Ministry of Culture is, resorting to all kinds of aggressive measures trying to get these things back, like threatening to stop excavations. There's also the Acropolis of Greece, pretty much like right on the other side of the split. And it was built by the Athens, meaning it was built for goddess Athena. Pretty much the same exact situation, multi-level temple buried, that they call a hill with precipitous sides, like, one of those hills that just have like steep rock cliffs as you see in nature. And then there's this other quote unquote hill with this big like straight line, obviously a buried structure, city. And then what they're calling the prison of Socrates. They was calling prisons and Acropolises, whatnot. But obviously Socrates was pre-12,000 years. The Acropolis went into Cecropes' hands after Athena's rule. He was the god of writing. Obviously Thoth, he abolished sacrifice. Human sacrifice shows you how far that goes back. He divided the inhabitants into 12 federations. And also, interestingly, the Acropolis of Greece was a Mycenaean place. They found Mycenaean evidence, so it shows you how far the Mycenaeans go back, definitely pre-12,000 years. Here's the Mycenaea. It's a really large ancient ruin structure, but what's this? Looks like a buried pyramid. Wouldn't be the first. And let's zoom away from the Acropolis. I mean, these buried structures are just everywhere. Here's one. Zoom in. And then this megalithic wall here. And another right here. Zoom in, and what do we have? We have an inner earth entrance. And then over here, interesting print here. Looks like possibly this entrance was sealed or something. And more. Right. This is just what the ground looks like everywhere. Like when you see all of Athens. The Temple of Hephaestus. And you zoom down to here to get a look. And it's one of those hills with precipitous sides. They certainly have an interesting way of growing their hills in Athens. And just really look at the ground. Look at all, and this is a different section. Like, there's just buried structures everywhere. Here's another little mountain hill with this machine-cut rock, and you can tell it's just a buried structure. All right, let's go back to the Pergamon Acropolis. There's mounds all around here. This one definitely looks like a buried temple. And all of these mounds. This one has these weird little lines. And I tried to do a street view with all of these mounds, and you cannot get close to any of them. I mean, come on. This one's so pyramidal. They're everywhere. And then all of this buried structure stuff. It's just all over. Heinrich Schliemann, none other but a German archaeologist, shocker, that did the excavations on Troy, also did excavations on the Mycenaea and Tiryns. All three are Mycenaean sites, which just means ancient Greeks. Excavations had started 7 years earlier by Frank Calvert. Both Frank and Heinrich were associated with the Crimean War by different means of profit. Frank served on the British consul. He was a United States consular agent. his family bought the land that they did the excavations on, so it wasn't a random excavation, and neither of them had any like expertise in the field of archaeology. Like most of these men doing these excavations from Germany, they don't have official training. They start out the excavation by taking dynamite and blowing the site up, destroying all the top layers, destroying many layers of our history. Now, I can only speculate that they did this because there was a lot of evidence of ancient Greece being in Turkey. Then William Dorfield joins, who is secretary of German Archaeological Institute, DAI, which is government. And then they find what they're calling the treasures of Priam. Priam was an infamous king of Troy. And Heinrich suggests that it must be his jewelry and vases and precious artifacts, even though they're not displaying anything that would actually show this. It's just like common style. And then they smuggle it out of Germany, and then Soviet soldiers steal it, which is all very suspicious. This is after a lot of people were suggesting it was fake, which I agree, they look fake. So they're trying to paint out Heinrich Schliemann as somebody that's just been fascinated with Troy and, since he was younger and really had this like passion to find it, knows so much about it. But Homer's Iliad is like the source of Troy. It's where all the details, what happened with the Trojan War, all the details of, what city it was, where it was located, all that stuff. And they say it was on the coast of the sea, like right on the water. This is not. So it's definitely safe to say that the real Troy is at the bottom of the ocean. But they're still trying to paint out this narrative and make it fit. There's seashells all, around the area excavated, which there's so many of these sites because the pole shift, it, washes all that water and brings the shells. So they're trying to say, oh, well, it must have been a bay around in this area, which is totally flat plain, doesn't even make sense. But he's very specific about the sea, not a bay. And also, so the supernova burn, the ash from the volcanoes, they find evidence of this and say, oh, well, it was burnt down, so this is evidence that the city was burnt. But being excavating all these other sites, he finds the same supernova burn and ash on all the sites. So it just feels like they're trying to make this fit for some reason. I don't know the significance of this site, what it really was, but it seems like to me that they're trying to use Troy as a cover for what this really was. And the whole thing is very strange, that they would be choosing a city like Troy, which is supposed to be a mythical city, to cover their tracks on whatever this is. But they're still at the same time like gaslighting Heinrich, and like our media, at least definitely when you Google his name, it's just like completely, oh, he made up stories. He said he spoke, he was self-taught in all these languages, but then you actually like read details and he was journaling in a different language in all these different countries he was in. So I don't know. They're just trying to make it questionable, I guess. So Heinrich excavated the Mycenae, whose walls were built by Cyclops. Also, the other two cities are Tiryns and Troy. Tiryns also, walls said to be built by Cyclops, and it was named after Tyrinthos, which is grandson to Zeus. And then we have Troy over here in Turkey, all Mycenaean sites. And side note, I think it was actually Enlil who was Zeus. I know everybody equates Marduk with Zeus, but Marduk wasn't even given the throne, patron deity, or even the name Marduk till much later, like ancient Babylonia. Greece was way prior, and they're definitely not the same deity because they were both one of the 12 Olympians, which I know, they play a lot of parts and whatever, but I believe, the history of their wars to be truth, so they had to be separate deities. Enlil actually means Lord Wind. I think Zeus was Enlil. Another interesting pre-Polshev ruins in Turkey, which was pre-Polshev Greece, is the Believe Mausoleum. They, of course, are saying it was a tomb, but there's no body been found. There's a 20-meter long, 10-meter high chamber underneath the ground, but that's just because it was buried in the Polshev. So this is the ruins of like a pyramid temple. You can see down there where it's buried, it's a larger section. And it's buried 10 meters, that's about 33 feet. Kind of reminds me of the Pyramid of Halicarnassus in Greece. There's actually there's something called the Greek pyramids, but they're the finished ruins. This is the famous one, and it has Greek history behind it. Pausanias, who was another messenger for the ancient Greeks, said that Proetus and Euchrysius, there was a battle for the throne here, but it wound up like ending in draw. And then Euchrysius was grandfather to Perseus. You can pause to read this little thing on Euchrysius if you think, this is like the kind of mythology that's all true. It's just history. And when they're not calling themselves gods, like that's when you know it's just history. There's also something called Pyramid Mountain, Mount Tegotus in Greece, with an ancient stone structure on top, and it's extremely pyramidal. It's obviously an inner earth mountain. Okay, back to Turkey, Believe Mausolleum. You can see the stones cut with one slice, like you do with so many of these ancient stone structures. And when you look on the map, it's right on the edge of Turkey, where Turkey and Greece separated. The whole thing was covered in marble slabs. There was more than 22.5 thousand cubic meters of marble covering everything, including these marble statues. And there was groups of these things. Here's two of them. They are griffins. Can you get any more Greek? And there was an entire centaur monkey wall, which is a famous ancient Greek battle of the centaurs, just like the one at Temple of Apollo, Greece. There was Greek inscriptions to the Greek gods. It was made for a successor to Alexander the Great, which means obviously they're on the timeline of Alexander the Great. He was actually an Atlantean, as his successor was. Even the quote-unquote chamber underneath, the bottom part of the pyramid, was covered with marble on the inside. Now let's talk about the Greek columns found everywhere. There was 2 stories. There was 28 of these Greek columns found. The Temple of Bel, or Palermo. Ever notice this structure in the background? Completely like buried pyramidal mountain with the structure all buried. Kind of reminds me of Mount Nemrut. And so this means obviously Temple of Bel had to be excavated, which it was. And then reconstructed, just like Baalbek Temple in Lebanon, also very close to the cusp of that split. I've already done a video on Baalbek, but it has the largest stones in the world, like 62 feet long, 20 feet wide. They're 800 tons or more. You can see these large stones are towards the bottom, and then it's reconstructed and like modified with all these little bricks. But I mean, you can only imagine if there's 33 feet buried, how many of these huge stones have been buried, like what that structure looks like. In ancient Mesopotamia, or the Sumerian tablets, Bel was Marduk. Marduk is later Baal. First I thought Baalbek Temple and Temple of Bel could have been ancient Rome, but I've actually found evidence that it was ancient Greece. Ancient Greece was before ancient Rome. But Baalbek Temple was dedicated to the Greek sun god Helios. Okay, back to Turkey. Kapilakaya Mountain. I covered that in one of my Inner Earth Mountain videos, but this is before I knew that Turkey was actually Greece.
Unlike other tombs, such as those in Egypt, with hieroglyphs or some sort of writing, this tomb bears only a simple inscription that reads Excavations. While there isn't any definitive information or record about its meaning, one theory suggests that it may be the name of an old Greek commander. After all, this territory was once Greek. The area was also part of the Kingdom of Pontus at some point in history, ruled by the ethnically Persian Mithridatic dynasty. The way the tomb is carved is similar to other tombs found throughout the region where the Pontic kings ruled.
Excavations was obviously an Atlantean, a king, a priest, one of the high-ups. And then Pontos has nothing to do with the Persian dynasty. He was the first primordial sea god.